Nous décrétons donc l'état d'urgence pour sauver notre industrie aéronautique.
L'industrie aéronautique est tellement stratégique qu'elle ne peut pas être abandonnée.
Welcome to France in Focus. Today we're high in the skies overlooking Toulouse, the so-called pink city of southwestern France and the capital of Europe's aviation industry. In the midst of an unprecedented crisis sparked by the coronavirus pandemic, we delve into the past, present and future of this integral part of France's economy. 1,300 companies are involved in France's aerospace business, turning out commercial, military and spacecraft and equipment. With a turnover of nearly 75 billion euros last year, it represents 12% of the country's total exports, supporting 300,000 jobs across the country. More than a third of those jobs are in and around Toulouse. The city's home to aerospace giant Airbus, as well as a whole network of suppliers. With some 40% of industrial activity in the region linked to aviation, the crisis has hit close to home.
Trouble ahead at this aeronautical park as employers explore ways to cut costs. At this subcontractor, nearly 300 jobs out of 719 are in jeopardy. Talks between the unions and management are underway.
It didn't go so well. Management has a very short negotiation schedule for a plan of this magnitude. It will be complicated.
Since the start of the pandemic, the site has lost 65% of its revenue, in part because of its links to Airbus. The plane manufacturer has cut its production by a third and announced the elimination of 15,000 jobs, including 3,400 in the region.
This is the A380 factory. It still operates, but they're working on their last order.
25 kilometers away, this other subcontractor is also in trouble. In recent years, the company has branched out into space and defense. The move helped to insulate it from the collapse of its aeronautical operations. In March, the factory closed for 15 days and then cut half its workforce.
We parted with about 8 to 10 temps. They worked up until the end, and we explained to them as they left at the very last moment. We told them that as soon as we could, we would take them back, but that's contingent on the amount of work.
For now, government aid gives him breathing room, but with just 3 months of guaranteed orders, the future remains uncertain for this small business and its 200 employees. In Toulouse, 700 subcontractors have been hit hard, and it's impacting the city. Here, subsoil studies are being carried out for a third metro line. The project's expected to cost nearly 3 billion euros, with 60% financed by local companies according to their number of employees. But with partial unemployment and layoffs in aeronautics, tax revenues have melted. The city must now find new sources of funding.
We are going to have a significant shortfall, but things that are planned will go ahead as planned. We are indeed going to take steps to be able to open up other sectors, welcome other sectors. But it's true that for the moment, we're very dependent on the aeronautical and space industries.
In Toulouse, everyone's counting on the government's aid plan to cushion the shock. While they keep their fingers crossed, air travel will pick up again.
The region's love affair with aviation took off in the early 20th century. So where better to get to the roots of the industry than here on a former runway, now site of the Envol des Pionniers or Flight of the Pioneers Museum. We're here with historian Jean-Marc Olivier, and we're here really at the foundation of where the aviation industry in Toulouse took root.
That's right. We're here where it all began in 1917, when Pierre-Georges Latécoère agreed to produce observation aircraft, the famous Samson 2A2 that you see here, for the French army.
And it didn't stop after the First World War, it continued.
Yes, Pierre-Georges decided to have a go at aviation transport, whereas up to that point he'd produced train carriages. He was convinced that aviation was the future, so he created the Latécoère line for the French colonial empire.
Why Toulouse?
Well, for several reasons. Firstly, it was the government's decision to produce aircraft during the war, far from the front lines. Then you had a talented and brave engineer in Pierre-Georges Latécoère who took a great risk. The planes took off in front of the factory, so you knew straight away if he succeeded or not in reproducing the famous Samson planes. And lastly, and most importantly I'd say, a qualified workforce. The problem was this workforce was fighting on the front lines, so female workers took over and worked in several factories in Montaudran.
Things didn't stop there, though. Toulouse became an international capital for the industry.
The French government wanted to bring a bit of balance to the country. Paris had too much influence, and it wanted to develop other major cities in France. Toulouse was chosen as one such city, with the aviation and space industry created there in 1964 as its main industrial activity. There were a certain number of projects underway at the time. Caravelle undertook its first flight in 1955 and sold 200 planes, which was a fairly decent commercial success. The Concorde was a technological feat. Its first flight was in 1969, but it was a commercial failure. And finally, Airbus, which by contrast was a huge success.
Fast forward now to today, the coronavirus pandemic has left airlines and manufacturers struggling to survive. What's the impact on the region?
The Toulouse urban area employs 75,000 people in aeronautics and space, of which 2/3 are direct jobs in the industry, so it's an important factor. But Toulouse doesn't have what's called Detroit symptom because the workforce is highly skilled, and it only makes up a minority of the city's population. Those working in Toulouse are in particular engineers, technicians and researchers. As for future domains, of course there's the space industry, but also IT, digital security, and sectors dealing with new materials, like composites.
Is this a moment of existential crisis for Toulouse?
In the short term, yes. There's been a brutal hit to the economy, and of course there will be difficulties. But the aviation and space industry is a strategic one, so European countries invested in it, like Germany or France, won't abandon Airbus because there are too many secrets which also affect the defence force. That's why governments have been quick to support the embattled industries. And we must consider the possibility that these industries could breed future geniuses, like Bill Gates from the tech business in Seattle.
Could this crisis also be an opportunity to help the industry reinvent itself?
The industry is continually making progress, but it cannot completely reinvent itself overnight. A plane takes years to go from first computer sketches to being put into service. So we can't just go from one industry to another. But Toulouse is a city of engineers, researchers and pioneers, and it has other projects in the works, like the Hyperloop train, which is based here.
Jean-Marc Olivier, thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you very much, Kate.
It's not all business here. Toulouse also hosts a devoted fan base. The Aile Ancienne, or Old Wings Association, has restored and showcased more than 100 different aircraft and gadgets from the past century. This plane, the Caravelle, first took to the skies 65 years ago. At the time, it was groundbreaking, with its twin engines positioned near the back to reduce noise and vibrations. These days, the focus has switched to getting environmentally friendly innovations off the ground. €1.5 billion of the government's bailout funds are earmarked for carbon-neutral technology, with a takeoff target of 2035.
A futuristic plane gliding in the sky. This could be what awaits commercial airlines as they search for greener and less polluting options. The ultimate goal is to get the planes running on hydrogen. It's a technology aviation giant Airbus has started to look at.
The future of aviation is carbon neutrality, not emitting carbon dioxide. We also need to work on ensuring the plane needs less energy to fly. Then we need to think about how to propel it, the engine, and what type of fuel we'll use.
Hydrogen has already fueled this four-seater plane in Germany. While the results are promising, it's still a long way off from transporting hundreds of passengers. France is funneling €1.5 billion to develop the plane of the future. The goal is to get aircrafts less reliant on fuel by 2030 before making them run on hydrogen by 2035.
If we want the chance to sell planes, they need to use green fuels, like hydrogen, for example. They also need to be comfortable and quiet. For that, you need cutting-edge technology. The last cutting-edge technology we had in France was 50 years ago with the Concorde.
The aviation industry accounts for just 2% of global CO2 emissions. Greener technology could reduce that number even further.
We've reached our final destination. Thanks for watching France in Focus, and stay tuned to France 24.